What's up guys, welcome back to Unreal Dev Hub. In today's step-by-step tutorial, we are going to learn how to build a key and door system that you can use in your games. Let's jump in. Alright, as we get started, first let's lay out how our blueprints are going to communicate with each other. So there's going to be three assets that we'll create. We'll create a key blueprint, we'll create a door blueprint, and then we will create a blueprint interface that we'll use to communicate between those two blueprints. What's going to happen is when we overlap the key, it's going to disappear. It's going to communicate with the door to tell the door that it's ready to be opened. Then we overlap with the door. Once it knows that it's ready to be opened, it will run a series of animations on its components, which will open the door and allow the player to move through. So first, let's go to our content drawer and we will create some of our blueprints. So I will right click, create a new blueprint class of type actor. I'll call this BP openable door. I'll create another blueprint of type actor and I'll call this BP key for door. And I'll right click one more time and I will go to blueprint interface and I will call this BP open door operations. And I will also link out in the description to my Patreon account where you can find all of the meshes I'll be using here. You can download them for free. And it's easiest just to use those because they have the proper pivots that I'll be working with here. You can still follow along with your own meshes if you'd like. Just make those considerations when we start aligning these objects in our blueprint. So let's start with our key. So I'm going to open up my key for door. So I'll double click in here and we will add a static mesh component. And I'm going to call this key. So I'll double click, I'll single click and hold. So now over here, it's a blank static mesh. So the mesh that will be included in my Patreon is called SM_key. And I'm going to just rotate this about 90 degrees this way. And then I'll move it up in space. If we want, we can go to where it says world grid material and type gold. There's some great starter materials with UE5, so we'll just use this gold material. Compile. And then let's go to our event graph. But before that, actually, let's just add one component. So we'll go to add up here in components. We'll type box collision. And we're going to drag this off the key if we have that selected, just so that it's not attached. We will click our box either in the viewport or up here. And then let's make the box extent of this in our details panel 200 by 200 by 200. And then in the transform, we're going to change this to 200 in the Z so that it is above the plane of the ground. So now what we're going to do is in our event graph, we're going to deal with the overlap event. So I'm going to right click on my box, which is my box collision. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say on add event on component begin overlap. And so this means this is the event that fires off when the player overlaps this box. And so I'm going to drag off here. I'm going to say other actor. I'm going to pull off and I will say cast to character. This is how we'll, in this situation, check that it is a character overlapping the box. And now what we need to do is we need to, when this would happen, we would have to let the door know that the key is collected. So what we're going to do is we're going to stop here for just a moment and we're going to add some functions into our blueprint interface. So I'll double click into my BPI open door operations, and this is how we're going to use a series of functions to communicate between our door and our key. So I'll open up, and over here in the top left, I'm going to create two functions. The first will be called set door reference on key. I'm going to add one more. It's going to be called tell the door that key is collected. A little bit wordy, but it makes it easier. So what we're going to do is we're going to use in the beginning, we're going to set a reference to the key or to the door on the key. And then when we collect the key, we're going to tell the door that the key is collected on the reference door. So what we'll do is on our door reference, we're just going to create a input, and we'll call this reference to door. Well, let's call it door reference. And over here, we're going to make this, instead of a Boolean, we'll make this of type actor. I'll make this an object reference. Let's compile and save. And then we're going to go back to our blueprint key for door up here. And let's go to our class settings right here. And then down here under interfaces, we're going to add our BPI underscore open door operations, which is how we're now going to have access to these two events that we've created. So what we're going to do now is, once we have overlapped this, we're going to drag the, let's see, actually what I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click, and I'm going to say tell door key is collected. And now we need to communicate with the door. So we're going to create a new variable, and we're going to call this door reference. And we're going to change this from Boolean to actor. We'll make this an object reference. And we're going to pull off right here, and we'll say get door reference. I'm going to right click it on the edge, and I'll say convert to validated get. Drag this over here, drag the is valid into here, and we're going to drag our door reference into here. And then at the end, we're going to destroy the key. Now, you're wondering, how do we get the door reference? So what we're going to do is we're going to right click here and say implement event on the set door reference on key. So we'll say implement. And then we're going to grab our door reference variable. We'll pull off here. We'll say set. We're going to set the door reference here. We're going to drag this execution pin in here. So what's going to happen is on begin play, we're going to add this functionality in just a second. Our door is going to call to the key and set a reference to itself. And then when we overlap this key, we're going to make sure that there's a valid door, and then tell the door that it's ready to be opened. And then we're going to destroy the key. So we'll just comment this by pressing C on the keyboard, and I'm going to say overlap, and then I'm going to select, I'm going to delete these because we don't need them. And I'm going to press Control C, or just C. I'm going to say set reference. So we keep this nice and clean. And next we'll deal with the logic on our door. All right. So we just dealt with our key, and it's like this gold box. And so if we now drag this out into our environment, we can see that just at first, nothing's going to happen because we won't have a valid reference to the door, so it's not going to destroy itself or tell the door that it's collected. But now we're going to add that logic into our door to make all that happen. So we'll open up our door, and we're going to add a series of components here. And so I'll show you first the structure in another blueprint so that you're not adding a bunch of things and not understanding what the hierarchy is. But so I'll just show you first. There's going to be two doors, a left and a right. Each of the meshes will actually be attached to a scene component. So it's just basically a blank object that we're going to use as a sort of dummy to rotate from instead of rotating the mesh itself. So there's going to be there's going to be a left scene component, a left door, a right scene component, a right door. There's going to be a collision volume, which is what is going to tell the door that the player has entered. There's going to be a key, and similarly to the doors, we're going to attach the key mesh to a scene component and move that. And then there's also, we're going to tell the key where to move by having two scene components for a key start and a key end. And then there's just this lock static mesh. Again, all these meshes will be available on my Patreon, and feel free to download them. So now let's open up our door and we'll start to add this hierarchy here. So we're going to go to our door and we'll start by adding our scene components. So I'll add a scene component and I'll call this left door. I'll press Ctrl D on my keyboard to duplicate it. I'll call this right door. I'm going to Ctrl D again, and I will say, we'll call this key location. We'll do it one more time. We'll say key start. You guessed it, one more time. Key end. So now what we're going to do is we're going to select these one by one and attach the respective static meshes to them. So I will add a static mesh. I'm going to just select this again, add static mesh. What you can actually do if you want is, instead of going in and adding them after the fact, is you could, for instance here, I could find my SM_key, which is the mesh you can download online, and I can add, and then once I have it selected in my content drawer, when I add a component, it will just add that specific mesh. So for here, I'll just show in my folder view, and this is where my doors are. So I'm going to go to my left door, and I will add that for my left door static mesh here. I'm going to go to my right door static mesh, and I'll add my SM right door. And then I actually need to add one more mesh, and I'll just select this, and then we're going to add our lock, so our SM lock. And now we're going to orient all of these properly. So right door, I'm going to, so let's see, which way am I looking at this? Okay, so let's make sure our snaps are on. So I'm going to set it to 50. So I'm going to move the right door to the right side over here. I'm going to move the left door so that it now butts up in the middle. I'm going to grab my lock and I'll move it up vertically. And I'm going to rotate it this way. And I will grab my key start and end. I'm going to select them both. And I'm going to move it into the center of the key. Move them out just a little bit. Like, let's say that. And then I'm going to move the key start even further this way. And I'll actually just right click up here and say copy the location of my key start. And I'm going to click my key location and I'll paste it there. And then I'm going to just rotate my key into place so we sort of know how it's going to look in the beginning. And so we can see that we actually want to move our key start and end down just a little bit. So we'll select these three and we'll actually turn our snap off for this. Move them just like that. And let's save. We can now also just apply some materials. So I'm going to type wood over here and I'm going to browse with this little magnifying glass and we'll find a wood that we like. In this circumstance, I'm just going to use the oak. So I'll select both of these static meshes. I'm going to make both of their materials oak. Beautiful. And I'll make the key this burnished, or I'll make the lock the burnished steel. And then we know that our key is going to be gold. So I'll select this and make it gold. So now we have a door. So this isn't going to do anything yet, but this is what it's going to look like. We're going to add our final component and we're going to make our box collision. So this, I'm going to make sure it's on the default scene route. I'm going to attach it. If you have anything selected and you add a component, it's going to automatically parent it to that component, which we don't want. So I'm going to zero out this location, zero out the rotation, and we're going to, oops, actually, sorry, that's the box I meant to do. So let's see. So I'm going to grab my box. I'm going to zero it out, and I'm going to set the box extent to 300, 300, 300, and then I'll move it up 300 units. So now when we approach from this side, we're going to collide with the box and then it'll open the door. So let's add that logic. All right, now let's add some logic to our door. So under class settings, up here, we're going to go down to implemented interfaces, click add, type BPI underscore open door operations. And we're going to see now these two interface events pop up on the left. So let's start with event begin play. So I'm going to delete these two and I'm going to first add a variable. So I'm going to hit the plus sign and I will say key reference. This is going to be of type actor. And I'm going to make this an object reference. I'm going to click this little eyeball right here to make it visible. It's going to be exposed to the outside. So on event begin play, I'm going to drag off right here and I'll say get key reference. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say convert to validated get. Drag this in here. And so assuming we have a valid reference, we're going to we're going to set the reference on the key to the door. So I'll right click here and I'm going to say set door reference on key. And we want to use this one right here. Actually, I lied. Let's see. I'm going to pull off set door reference. Okay, so I'm going to pull off here and I'm going to use this. And we want to use the one that says message. So this is going to use that blueprint interface event. And if you see it says this does nothing if the target does not implement their required interface. This is the one we're going to want to use. So I'll pull off here and I'm going to drag here and I will say reference to self. And then I'm going to hide the key because right now I'm just sort of showing it in the viewport and I could say set hidden in game as default, but we'll just do it on begin play. So I'm going to grab this and I'll say set hidden in game and I'll drag this up here. Make this new hidden is true so that it's now hidden. I'm going to drag a comment around this and I will say start or just begin play set reference on key. So again, we've just grabbed our key reference and then we've set a reference to the door, which is the self, on the key. So that in our key, if we go up here to our key, this is that event. So we're calling it from our door, we're saying set door reference on key. And this is the event set door reference on key. So we're passing through that door, setting it here so that we can later communicate to the door and say, hey, door, the key has been collected. So now let's open our door. Okay. So this is going to happen in two phases. If we saw over here, when we pick up our key, the key disappears, and then the key is going to move towards the lock. It's going to rotate 180 degrees. And then in the second phase, the doors will open. So we'll start with the first section. And we'll break these down piece by piece so we can see them happening. So in my door, I'm going to create a custom event. So add custom event, and we'll call this open lock. So let's set a series of variables just to get this started so that we have access to all of them later. And let's start with one called door is opened. This is going to be a Boolean, which is a true false. I'm going to press Control D just to duplicate it. I'm going to say key is collected. We already have our key reference, and we're going to create a new variable right here. And this is where we're going to deal with our rotation variables. So there's going to be a lot of rotating for the doors and the key. So this is where we're going to save those out. So we're going to create one that is called right door starting rotation. We're going to change this from a Boolean to a rotator. And I'm going to press Control D just duplicate it again. And we're going to say, let's do right door target rotation. I'm going to control D, and this is going to be called left door starting rotation. And then I'm going to duplicate this one, and we'll just make this the left door target rotation. Additionally, we're going to do this one more time, and we're going to do key target rotation. So we'll just say key starting rotation, and then key target rotation. All right. So that's all we need for now. And so after we have our custom event for open lock, we're going to add some logic to deal with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull off and say door opened. The second that we start this process, we're going to say that it's opened. Instead of doing it at the end, we don't want it to repeat, so we're just going to do it at the very beginning. So once we call the event, which we'll add in a second, to open the lock, we will say the door is opened, and then we're going to grab our key, so our SM key. We're going to pull off and say set hidden in game to make it no longer hidden. So hidden is false. And we're going to cache or save our values for the key. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our key location, and we're going to set the starting rotation and the target rotation. So I'm going to pull off, and I'm going to grab this, and I'll say set key starting rotation and set key target location, or rotation, sorry. So I'm going to grab this, and I'll say get world rotation. I'm going to drag this into here, pull this into here, and try to keep this as organized as possible so we don't have a bunch of spaghetti. I'm going to drag this into here, and then we're going to pull off of our return value from our rotator, and we're going to say combine rotators. From here, I'm going to type a 180 degree value into the X, and I just know that because if I grab my key location, when I enter, let's see, so what is it? You'll just have to trust me on that one. We can see the values reflected up here, and we'll edit that if that's not correct, but I believe that's correct. So 180, and I'm going to save. I just like to save periodically. And now we're going to add a timeline. So this is just caching key rotation. So we're grabbing the values, and then I'm going to right click and say add timeline. So I'm going to call this rotate and move key. I'm going to drag this into here to play from start. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a curve inside our timeline. So I'm going to open up in the top left where it says track. I'm going to click this button, and I'm going to add a float track. I'm going to right click, hit add key, and do that twice. I'm going to select the first one. I'm going to say 0, 0 to zero that out. Grab this first one, and I'm going to say 4, 0. So what's going to happen is we're actually just going to make this timeline length 4 seconds. And in the first 2 seconds, it's going to move towards the lock. And the last 2 seconds, it's going to rotate inside the lock. So this is actually going to be time 2, value 1. I'm going to grab these, and I'm going to press 1 on my keyboard, which is going to smooth these out. This is how you can control the tangents easily. So if you right click, I just set it to auto, and by default it's linear. So if I were to select these and press 4, it's going to make them linear there, but I just use that hotkey by pressing 1. I'm going to add another track, and I'll just call this key rotation, and I'm going to call this one up here key location. And to edit those, I'm just right clicking on them and hitting rename. So here I'm going to add 2 keys. I'm going to say add key, add key. I'm going to change the first one to time 2 value 0, and then I'm going to make this time 4 value 1. And I'll do the same, and I'll make these the auto tangents. So what we're going to do now is we're going to use these values to linearly interpolate between two values. And so first we'll do rotation, or the location. And so I'm going to grab my key location, which is just the scene. I'll call this key scene object. And this is just the thing that the key is attached to. So I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to say set world location. And on update, I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to drag off of this new location, and I'm going to say lerp vector, which just means linearly interpolate between two values. And we're going to use this 0 to 1 value that we've created on our timeline as our lerp. And so what we're just going to do is we didn't cache our locations, but we're just going to grab them here. So I'm going to grab my key start. I'm going to grab my key end. I'm going to pull off, and I will say get world location. Up. I'm going to pull return value into A. I'm going to select this. I'm going to Control C on my keyboard and Control V. I'm going to drag my key end into this target. I'm going to drag my return value into B. So here basically what we're doing is as time progresses on this 0 to 1 curve, we're pumping that 0 to 1, using that as the alpha to lerp between our A of the start and our B of the end, which is going to find the values as time progresses between these two locations. So we're going to do the same now for our rotation. So I'm just going to Control C, Control V this. I'm going to say set world rotation. Drag this in here. And I'm going to pull off here, and I will say lerp rotator. And we're going to do the same, but see here we've already cached these values. So I'm going to say starting rotation here. I'm going to drag off and say target rotation here. And then we're going to use this key rotation alpha we've created, and we're going to drag that into our alpha. And I'll double click here to just kind of clean this path up around here so we're not creating a bunch of spaghetti. And now we are good to go. And so we'll test some of this out so we don't go the whole way before seeing it. And what we're going to do that is we're going to drag our blueprints into our environment, and we're going to set the proper references for them. Before we do that though, we are going to add our collision, or we're going to add an event to our collision so that we can properly execute this event. So I'm going to right click my box, my collision volume. I'm going to say add event on component begin overlap. And I'm going to drag off my other actor, and I will say cast to character. This is an easy way. We don't want to cast to our BP character. We want to cast to our C++ class. But we're going to cast character, say, hey, other thing overlapping this box, are you a character? If so, we're going to add a branch that you can either press and hold B on your keyboard and left click, or right click and say branch. So I'm going to drag in this execution pin in here. And we need two conditions to be true in order to open the door. So I'm going to pull off condition. I'm going to say and Boolean, which is going to say all of the conditions in here must be true in order to proceed. So I'm going to drag off door is opened. I'll say get, and I'll say key is collected. So I'm going to drag key is collected. So key is collected is true, and we want door is opened not true, which means that the door has not already been opened. So I'm going to pull off here, and I'll say not Boolean, which is basically just a, inverse of this value. I'll say and move this here. So it must be, in order to open the door, the overlapping actor must be a character. The key must be collected, and the door must not already be open. So I'm going to compile. Make sure that the default values for key is collected and door is opened are both false, or else that'll cause some trouble. So assuming that is true, we're going to then open the lock. So I'm going to pull off here and say true. We'll say open lock. drag a comment over this. So I'll select these, press C on my keyboard, and say overlap with player to open door. So again, let's just do a brief recap and then we'll drag these into our scene. On begin play, we're getting a reference to our key, which we'll set in the environment. We're setting a reference to our door on the key, and then we're setting the key to become invisible. When we overlap this blueprint, it's going to test that we're a character. It's going to make sure we have the key and that the door isn't open. If that's the case, we're going to open the door. We're going to cache some rotation values, and then we're going to move the key between two locations and then rotate it 180 degrees. So let's go test this out in our viewport. All right, and before we jump into testing, what we need to do is one final thing. We already have these interface functions here, and we need to right click and say implement event. For the event, tell the door that key is collected. And then we're going to drag our variable for key is collected and say set. Pull this execution pin in here and say that key is collected. So what's going to happen is when we overlap the key, we're telling the door that the key is collected. That event is going to communicate with the door right here. And then we're going to say, hey door, the key has been collected, so that this variable is true. So let's now go into our map, and I'm going to drag in my key for my content drawer. And I'm going to drag in as well my door. Drag this right over here. And we'll see that because we've exposed this variable, we now have access to this key reference. So if we recall, we hit the little eyeball, which is making it exposed. So we're going to hit this little eyedropper. We're going to eyedrop our key. You see that it's popped in now right over here. And I'm just going to untoggle my breakpoints that I've added for myself. I'm going to say play from here. So I'm going to overlap this. The key is going to get destroyed. I'm going to come up here, and then we're going to see the key appear. It's becoming visible. It's going to move, and then it's going to rotate. Now let's finish this up by adding our opening for the doors. So in our door blueprint, now we're going to add some logic for the opening. So after our timeline, we now need to do a series of things. We have our lock and our key, and we're just going to make them disappear. So I'm going to drag them both out here. I'm going to pull off, and I'll say set hidden in game. Actually, I lied. I'm going to destroy them. So I'm going to pull off, and I'll say destroy component. This isn't always the best option, but here it's fine. I could, set hidden in game or set visible, turn off collision, but right now I'm just going to destroy them. And then we're going to create another custom event. I'll drag this stuff down, give ourselves a little room. I'm going to say add custom event. So add custom event, and I'll say open doors. And right up here, I'm going to pull off and I'll say open doors after our timeline up here. So now, once that happens, it's going to continue doing whatever logic spits out of this custom event. And so what we're going to do here is first we will cache our rotations and for the left and right doors. So I'm going to grab my right door scene object right here. I'm going to pull off my right door starting rotation, and I'm going to say set, and my target rotation, I'll say set. So I'm going to pull off, and I will say get world rotation. Drag this up here. From open doors, I'll pull into here, drag this into here, drag this into here, pull off of the return value and say combine rotators. I'll pull off of here. And so for a lot of these, we want to make sure that when we set it up in the beginning, our things are zeroed out. If you're having rotation issues with your key, just make sure that your rotation is zeroed out. It's kind of accounts for that, or it requires that. And so for my right door, I'm going to add 90 and then set that as the target. And then we're going to just let's see, I'm going to copy this with Control C, drag this in here. I believe I should be able to, yep, so I can right click this set and I'll say replace with left starting rotation, and then I'll click this and I'll say replace with left target rotation. And then I'm going to drag my component for the left door scene component up here. And so if I just highlight this, let's just remember that we are caching rotation values. And then before we continue, let's set this value to -90 because it's rotating the opposite direction. So we're just grabbing our right door, setting its current and target values, and our left door, setting its current and target values. I'm going to right click and say add timeline, and I will say open door timeline. I'll leave this here because what we're going to do is we'll open this up. I'm going to click up here in the top left and say add float track, and I will call this rotation lerp. I'm going to right click, and I will say add key to curve. Do that one more time, add key to curve. I'm going to set the first one to time 0 value 0, the second one to time 1 value 1. I'm going to select both of these, press 1 on my keyboard to make them this smooth tangent. So this is what's standard by pressing 4. This is what I like, just to smooth it out. I'm going to set the length to 1. You'll see why in just a second. So I'm going to go back to my event graph. I'm going to grab my timeline, the open door timeline from the components. I'm going to say get. I'm going to pull off. I'll say set play rate. I'm going to drag this in here. I'm going to drag this in here. I'm going to pull off new rate. I'm going to say divide. I'm going to put 1 in the top. I'm going to pull off here and say promote to variable. And I will call this desired time in seconds. And so now, because we've done this 1 divided by, and we've done a 1 second float, a 1 second curve, if we want this to be 3 seconds, we would just do that here instead of customizing the float and dragging these keys to be 3. So I prefer it this way. This makes it really easy to adjust the play rate based on a speed after the fact, so you don't have to change this curve. So now what we're going to do is we are going to grab our right door and our left door, and we'll do right door first. So I'm going to grab my right door starting rotation. I'll say get, and my right door target rotation. I'll say get. I'm going to pull off here, and I will say lerp rotator. I'll drag this into my B. I'm going to drag rotation lerp, which is our 0 to 1 value, into our A. I'll grab my right door over here, and I'll say set world rotation. I'll pull off here and say update. I'm going to pull this value in here. And I am going to, in the same way that I can replace this here, I'm going to grab this and this. I just selected them and pressed Control C. I'm going to Control V them over here. Drag this pin in here. And now we need a target for our door. So I'm going to grab my left door component, drag it in here. Reach down, I'm going to grab my rotation lerp and bring it into my alpha. Clean this up a little bit. And that should do it. All right, so we're in a good place. So let's review. This is the section where we're dealing with our movement of the key, rotation of the key. Once that's done, we're destroying the key and the lock. We're going to open the doors here. Once we're opening the doors, we are caching the rotation values, so setting what it is in the start and setting what we want it to be, which is just +90 or -90, respective to which door it is, because they're at different rotations. And then we are going to set a new play rate at whatever speed we want. So I said 3 seconds it's going to take for the doors to open, which we've set over here. And then we're going to play this timeline, which is going to rotate the right and left doors, respective to those starting and ending rotation values. And then we're good. So let's compile, save, and test this in our map. So I'm going to right click and say play from here. I'm going to overlap my key. Now that I have the key, I'm going to go here. We'll see that the key moves, rotates, disappears, and then opens the door. We can see here that the left door is rotating in the wrong direction. So let's just make a quick edit for that. Aha, and that is because I have not replaced these values. So I'm going to right click here. I'll say replace variable for left door starting rotation. Right click and say replace variable for left door target rotation. And now we should see that fixed. So I'm going to grab my key. Key is destroyed. Key is communicated with the door. The door is ready for me. I collide with the door. The key moves, rotates, and now the door opens. All right. That was awesome. And I hope you guys learned something great. Hopefully there was a lot of useful bits of information here. Using blueprint interfaces is super valuable. It's important to know how to communicate between blueprints properly. And we used some very common methods to move objects and operate within components within our blueprint. Hope you all enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for more Unreal Engine 5 content and tutorials. Have a great day.